Thank you. Hi, hi everyone. We are here with Marika Mikiashvili of Droa Party, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs of Droa Party. Hi Marika, how are you?
Hello, Federica, Europa.radicale, and everyone attending. Very nice to be here with you.
Thank you. We did this live because tomorrow will be an important day for Georgia, for Tbilisi also, that is the place where the protest going on. So tomorrow the mobilization, we know, of Georgian people reached the 16 days milestone. Is a very a very big
Yes.
thing. So how now has the nature of the protest and the morale also of the citizens on the streets, because we know that the protesters face increasing harsh repression. So are you in contact with someone and how doing the situation?
Yes, thank you very much. You're right. It will be 600th consecutive day of protests. So every single day for 600 days, people have not missed a day. There are some people who've been literally personally there for 600 days. Maybe they just missed 1 or 2 days when they were sick or something. The protests in general is going on, I would say, even longer because starting from April 2024, the very least, there's always something. There's one protest cycle basically from April 2024. And I would like to applaud my people, Georgians, who are so persistent and so unyielding, and they don't get tired. I cannot think of another protest and a movement, especially in contemporary Europe, that lasted this long and in such a persistent manner, in a daily manner. And this is remarkable also because even a couple of years ago, people would say, Georgians would also say about themselves that Georgians cannot protest without leadership, or if Georgians don't achieve their objectives in a couple of days, they get tired and they go home. And people always assumed that Georgians were more emotional protesters and they would protest for as long as they were just angry and then they lacked discipline. So we proved everyone and ourselves wrong in that regard. And I would say that the biggest achievement of these protests have been delegitimization of the Georgian dream. And although they are now throwing everything at us and it's illegal to basically even protest in Georgia, and people are in jail for standing on a sidewalk in protest, and now they are also criminalizing uh, online criticisms, basically. People get fines for Facebook posts. Nevertheless, I don't believe, and people don't believe, that this is out of long-term strength of the Georgian dream. It seems more like an attempt to, again, throw everything at us so that we get intimidated and stop protesting before they have to show their structural weakness. And the delegitimization of the Georgian dream is visible on a domestic scale and on international scale. I would say that they are quite isolated internationally, almost like a pariah. And this is quite unprecedented also, because the Georgian dream also hoped to get away with anything and still be embraced by the international community, on the example of some other countries in the region that have very bad record of human rights and democracy, but are still big international players. However, thankfully, they lack their own economic um, self-sufficiency. Like, for example, Georgia has no oil, and in many ways, although the Georgian Dream is currently strong, still they are structurally for the long term weak because their money, their power depends on lots of international calculations, and they are governing over a population that is overall against them. So internally, you also see that they are ostracized in a way. And these daily protests, these prolonged protests, have helped sustain this feeling in Georgia that there's no fait accompli. So like there's still a resolution to come because like something unstable is happening and it's stuck somewhere in the middle, neither here nor there. It's neither victory nor loss. But the fact that despite so much economic resources, security resources, and full administrative control over the country, they have definitively won over the people of Georgia. That alone is quite remarkable. And I will remind you that Bidzina Ioanishvili, the Georgian but Russian-made billionaire oligarch who is behind the scenes like this dictator in Georgia, his personal wealth to Georgia's national GDP ratio is, I think, now around 25%, but it used to be 35%. So he has around, let's say, 30% of Georgia's national GDP in his own pocket. And that's just him. So he has his business friends and the connections that so they have unquestionable monopoly over Georgia's economy and the state structures, which, by the way, was not the case in Ukraine 2014. Yanukovych was structurally and financially much weaker than the Georgian Dream is currently. And also compared to Armenia's 2018 revolution, for example, it's a different case because it was still, we can discuss it later, but it was more of an exhausted autocracy and even security apparatus didn't really want to sustain them. Now we are dealing with an autocracy that is as a business enterprise, like the country is a business model and the kleptocracy, and they are economically also very much sustained by Russia sanctions evasion. Georgia's recent economic growth, which doesn't reflect on the people of Georgia really, but it reflects on the elites, and the Georgian Dream boasts about economic progress in Georgia. It's mostly Russia sanctions evasion. Although one problem now with the protests, and I feel that I know that everyone is wondering about it, is that yes, it does not. It prevents full state, full consolidation, or at least like comfortable consolidation of the regime, but it is also not translating into a victory of the protests. After 600 days, people are protesting still. Repressions are even more widespread than they were before. Financial, legislative, and so on, and the people are not winning yet. Why? Well, I would say that unlike 2014 Ukraine, people saw in Georgia that anger alone was not sufficient to restore justice in Georgia and remove the regime. Anger that outpoured in November, December 2024. Yes, well, I'm extremely glad that there are no fatalities in Georgia. But the only reason that that is the case is not the kind hearts of the Georgian Dream, but the fact that they know that the moment they cross that red line, no one in the country will be asking about, okay, we don't like these guys, but what's next? And they will be removed momentarily. Yeah, that was the difference between like Yanukovych acted much more stupidly in 2014 and he had more financial and structural limitations. And the Georgian people think that, okay, so anger alone was not enough. And now they want also positive dynamism, positive action, a consolidated alternative and vision of the future that will help them put together all their efforts. So now that standing on the sidewalk is a crime in Georgia, and it does not seem like there's this consolidated political alternative, people think, many people think, and I cannot blame them in this really, that, well, I will go to jail anyway for standing on a sidewalk. Why don't I wait for the moment when my effort will matter more in this collective effort, when, for example, I will see more political dynamics, I will feel that something is happening, and then will sacrifice my efforts for the cause in a more efficient way. So now, unfortunately, the problem is of a consolidated alternative, and that is a political issue. That is the opposition's issue.
Yeah. So the people were alone now. Um, I want to say that the opposition are not much very strong to give an alternative to the people. You say no. So we know that Georgian Dream Party has openly threatened to ban the
Yes.
main opposition party. So this is a problem for have a construction of an opposition, because if you arrest politician and arrest the protesters, is very difficult to have good consequences for
Yes.
the people that
So,
protest. Say,
so now,
I know that
sorry.
I know that you do something in this way. There are people of opposition that can give a future, a different future.
Well, the thing is that opposition leadership is also persecuted and prosecuted. My party leader, Elene Khoshdaria, is currently in jail for writing a graffiti on the Georgian Dreams campaign banner. She wrote Russian Dream in solidarity with a student protester female who also did the same before. And she got 1.5 years for that. And she's a mother of 4 children. She's in prison currently at a clinic because her health deteriorated. But she has other cases against her, and just about almost every opposition leader also has cases against them. And we expect that this so-called sabotage case, which accuses opposition leaders of sabotaging the state, they will probably have their verdicts out in around August or maybe September, but more probably August. Last year, the entire leadership was in jail. Now there's this brief period when some of them are out, but they will most likely be brought back to jail, imprisoned again on the charges that they cooperated with hostile foreign countries to overthrow legitimate government in Georgia, and also sanctions advocacy. So when my party leader Elena and 2 other leaders, Zurab Japaridze and Georgi Vashadze, face up to 15 years in prison for sanctions advocacy, for saying that the Georgian Dream should be sanctioned, for Russia's sanctions evasion in Ukraine war, and for gross human rights violations. So most likely, almost the entire leadership of opposition will again be in jail. And that's the thing that is one big problem why it is hard to consolidate and show alternative, because on a personal level, everyone is dealing with this like constant attacks and in a way like paralyzation, because they are either preparing for jail or are in jail. I'm not saying like full paralyzation, but of course your resources get also human resources get limited when you are in jail. Second issue is financial issue. The resistance in Georgia currently absolutely has no financial means make a political campaign or to even reach out to people. Because yes, anything and everything needs some funds, even touring the regions, even having a visit abroad. For example, I am a party foreign secretary. And I had quite important visits this past month. For us, the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe is very important ground for diplomacy because they're political groups, national parliament members, and so on. And then I attended ALDE Congress. Then I also had a speech at UN in Geneva on behalf of Liberal International about human rights situation in Georgia. And for most of these expenses, I had to fundraise on my own Twitter platform. So I have my personal Twitter where I constantly post news and analysis on Georgia and sometimes beyond Georgia, the regional patterns, of this autocratic capture. And I had to fundraise there. So this imprisonment plus financial situation is a big problem of why opposition is in a way stuck and finds it very hard to form an alternative. However, also, yes, I mean, there are always some people who are spoilers, I would say, but structurally also, since there are many parties in Georgia and no single party has a plurality or a majority, opposition tries to operate on a democratic principle. For example, I find it quite exhausting that there can be 3 different meetings a day, 4 different meetings a day, and constantly discussing something constantly, but it takes a lot of energy, and even just to reach agreements, even if we are on the same page strategically, tactical small differences, because no party carries the majority voice or even plurality voice, this gets structurally difficult, like the problems with democratic decision making when you face a completely like monolithic top-down autocratic regime. The Georgian Dream members, they receive message boxes. What should they say? What should they address? What they should do on a messenger or like WhatsApp or something, because they don't have any personal say in any of this, right? So these are the reasons of opposition's setback currently, I would say. But I want to underline that this does not mean that the opposition, people in the opposition, are relaxed or are not fully in the process or are not persecuted. Quite the opposite. The daily life of people in the opposition in Georgia is extremely packed, extremely exhausted, always trying to find some solutions, always attending meetings, discussions, or rallies and organizing this protest, or they're also every day somebody's trial. And they are most opposition members, their accounts are frozen, they've all been in jail already, if not under criminal law, then by administrative law for sure, like 2 weeks or 3 weeks imprisonment. So I would be careful to distinguish that, like, people in the opposition are extremely invested and extremely persecuted. But unfortunately, because of some constraints, all their many efforts has not yet reflected into population actually seeing a viable alternative. Yeah.
Yeah, and we saw that the rhetoric and the laws introduced by the government, so from the foreign agents law to restriction to the civil society, also the totally absence of pluralism of information. Mizia Amaglobeli is in jail because she was a independent journalists against the government. In this situation, what kind of help do you need by European Union and also by Italy, because we are in Italy. So it is important also to us know how can we do here, and also how we can speak to the people and try to give them the information about the Russian model that is introduced now in Georgia.
Thank you. First of all, I'd just like to underline that Georgia has always been the first testing ground of Russia's new and new methods of subversion. Georgia was the first to be invaded by Russia, first where these breakaway separatist republics were upheld and strengthened by Russia. And then also this imposition of a regime that is aligned with Russia. I firmly believe that Russia's best case, I mean, it's completely impossible at this point, of course, but like what Russia would want to do with Ukraine is to impose a similar regime in Ukraine like it did in Georgia. Fully aligned and to basically bring Ukraine back fully on Russian orbit. But Georgia playbook is important because it gives a glimpse into Russia's plans elsewhere also. And this foreign agents law that was adopted in Georgia in 2024 May, it's no coincidence that exactly at the same time, the same law was adopted in Kyrgyzstan, which is also a former Soviet republic, and Russia sees Kyrgyzstan as its sphere of influence. And from what I know, the same law was pushed for in Kyrgyzstan for 10 years before that. So it was pushed for 10 years, and it was adopted at the same time that it was adopted in Georgia. Georgia also, the Georgian Dream did it at a second attempt because in 2023, after physical clashes, they backed down tactically, and that is actually very important. Their feature is tactical withdrawal to come back stronger when you don't expect it. So for the 1 year that they pretended that they would not be adopting this law ever again, they just strengthened the security apparatus to the point that no crackdown would ever force them to step back in legislative sense. And also in Republika Srpska, which is the Serb entity in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the Serb entity is, and back then was still ruled by a separatist, Milorad Dodik, who's also under sanctions. So they were also pushing for the same law. So same law in 3 different regions, Central Asia, South Caucasus, and Western Balkans at the same time. So it's not a coincidence, and what happens in Georgia does not stay in Georgia. If Russia can undermine and subvert a society that is 85% pro-EU and historically anti-Kremlin, this is a textbook of how any other autocrat can undermine any other society step by step with what we call a slow boiling of the frog. Because in Georgia, no one can say that they're anti-EU, but they twist reality in the sense that even now the Georgian Dream says we are a pro-EU party, just that EU doesn't want us, or to join EU now means to start war with Russia. Let's wait a couple more years or something, and let's see what happens then. So what happens in Georgia, again, doesn't stay in Georgia, and Georgia should be seen in this puzzle as everything else of European security architecture. That is one thing. And also, isolation of the regime, of diplomatic isolation, is extremely important. Financial like to cut off their financial means and resources, to disrupt their financial lines, and to starve their apparatus of repression. That is very important. And international donors, international organizations, or government should know, where does their money go? Does it go to actual development or aid in Georgia, like hospitals and schools, or does it go in the pockets of the regime apparatus and then it's used to crack down on people in Georgia? Then also, of course, aid to independent media and CSOs is very important because remaining independent media in Georgia is extremely struggling financially. They are getting fined every day for thousands of euros for mispronouncing something. Or when, for example, Formula TV, which is one of only two remaining major independent media outlets, I think it was yesterday that they were fined 1,700 euros for saying on air repressive laws because they were told by communication commission that this is your subjective opinion that the laws are repressive. So yes, again, like to see Georgia in this big puzzle with everything else, diplomatic isolation of the regime, financial isolation of the regime, and financial aid to CSOs and independent media are very important. Also, of course, it's some investigation into the use of chemicals against protesters in 2024, November, December. I suppose these are the groundwork and ground rules, and everything else. Like, for example, the OSCE Moscow mechanism also spoke of universal jurisdiction, and it is possible to at some point prosecute the guilty parties in Georgia. I suppose that is it, and especially in terms of Italy, I know that Italy and Italian government still supports some form of dialogue with the Georgian Dream, and they want to keep engaged with the Georgian Dream to a degree to not cut off all forms of communication. I, of course, fully am aware and appreciate that Italy wants to do what is best for Georgians. But I think that Georgians have always expected full isolation of the regime, because when Georgians see that somebody shakes hands with them and then the regime uses it as a to pretend like they have broken their international isolation and to pretend that they are embraced and everything in Georgia will be normalized at the expense of Georgians and protesters. That is usually very heartbreaking. So diplomatic isolation is important, and it is also important to diplomatic isolation. Why it's important to have this clarity of who is guilty of Georgia not progressing on the EU path, because Georgian Dream and their huge propaganda apparatus always blame the EU for this. And this clarity and isolation makes people see that it's actually the Georgian Dream's fault.
Absolutely. We know that, for example, last year in the summer, the mayor of city of Milano
met with Tbilisi's Georgian Dream mayor. Yes, Kacha, and that's a big problem. Like,
information. There's a lack of information, in my opinion, also a lack of information about Georgia in Italy.
Yes, maybe. And when there's nothing of a breaking news happening, it's usually hard to sustain media attention to Georgia. I will say that Kaladze, the one who played at AC Milan and has his connections with the mayor of Milan and many other people in Italy, it was his election banner that my party leader Elena Hostaria wrote Russian Dream on. And she has 4 children, and she's now separated from her family for a graffiti on Kaladze's banner. So in a way, Kaladze is also quite personally responsible for the unlawful jailing of my party leader.
Absolutely. So we follow tomorrow this 600th day of protest. We promise you that in these days we'll update our dossier of political prisoners made by some people of Europa Radicale, Chiara Squarcione, Silvja Manzi, and Igor Boni that they were in Tbilisi in October 2024, and we continue to inform Italian people and also our government. So when we will update the dossier, we will send it to our government for take a position, a right position.
Thank you so much. And one thing I forgot to say is targeted sanctions, something that the regime fears the most. Targeted sanctions that also encompasses their family members and travel bans. They love to shop in Milan and Rome and to have holidays while they're repressing people. And if EU targeted sanctions are not possible, Italy, it would be great if Italy joined a coalition of the willing, a group of countries to impose targeted sanctions. I don't know how I could skip that accidentally, but yes, it is very important.
Thank you, Marika, for your time.
Thank you, Federica, for invitation, and have a great evening. Thank you, everyone.
You too. Bye. Bye.